It's fair to say that the country is divided more or less between three camps: those who would identify themselves as pro-Ukrainian and pro-Western, those who are kind of openly pro-Russian, and then a huge camp somewhere in between. But yeah, Slovakia is a deeply polarized country, as we have seen in the presidential elections and as we saw in the parliamentary elections last year as well.
Now, Slovakia's Prime Minister remains in a serious but stable condition this lunchtime following yesterday's assassination attempt. Robert Fico was shot several times during an attack yesterday in the small town of Handlover, northeast of the capital Bratislava. Well, the country's president-elect has been speaking this morning.
I'm appalled that at the end of this hate, at the sharp end, is the Prime Minister of a democratically elected government who is now fighting for his life. An attempted assassination of the Prime Minister is an attempted assassination on democracy.
So what do we need to know about this country and what else is happening in that part of the world? The Times diplomatic editor Roger Boys joins us. Roger, first of all, who is the Slovakian Prime Minister? There are people who don't know. It's probably not a country they've spent a lot of time thinking about.
Well, Robert Fico is a tough guy. He's on the, I suppose, the far right. He's a Eurosceptic. He's very much in the camp in Europe that we would call the Orban camp. That's to say, people who are want to keep doors open to Russia and to Putin and actually mimic Putin's style to some degree, but nevertheless are quite keen to take European Union subsidies and the benefits that come with membership. So they occupy an ambiguous role, and this ambiguous role, and this goes for other countries too, creates an inherent instability in the political system.
And I mean, he's been on quite a journey, like you said, from being quite pro-European to now being quite anti, while still taking the money. Is part of what we've seen, is it a reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the fact that Ukraine has not seen that off in the way that some would have hoped to begin with, and actually countries in Russia's orbit thinking, well, we need to get in with Vladimir Putin so they don't face the same sort of thing?
Yeah, you have to remember a lot of what Putin has been up to began long before Ukraine, long before the invasion in 2014 even. There was, it essentially kicked off, although one can argue it happened before, but it kicked off in Georgia in 2008, when he marched in there. And it rots some of these states, which are always quite wobbly and fragile, and right down to the foundations. So in a way, it becomes inevitable that they ask, well, Putin, who's increasingly aggressive, increasingly disruptive of all of our attempts to organize free elections, or the European Union, which has demands of its own. And it's this choice that's crystallizing now around Europe. And the more solid you are, the more stable you are, the easier the choice is. The problem comes then in the borderlands with Russia, or the former Soviet Union, and because people don't quite know which way to jump.
And just finally then, what can the West, if that's the right word, or certainly the European Union, do in response? I mean, there are European Parliament elections coming only next month, where right-wing, potentially far-right parties, Eurosceptic parties might do quite well. Is there a risk if the sort of European Union throws its arms around Slovakia even more, that actually only increases tensions and might force them into the arms of Putin more? How do those other countries balance the relationships with places like Slovakia and Georgia?
Yeah, this was always going to be a polarized European election. That was clear months ago, even before this assassination attempt. So, it should unite civil societies against interference and into against manipulation. And most of that manipulation, to be honest, comes from Russia. So, and yet here we have a friend of Russia who's been hit. So these are complexities, and I think they're too complex to influence the vote. And what we'll find is probably a big sympathy vote for Fico in Slovakia. Big votes for so-called strong leaders. So Orban will be one of them. But for the main, anxiety, really. Anxiety and maybe stay away. Russia is, has let down a lot of its former allies, like Armenia and so on. So they, so the answer is what? No. So the question is, what can Europe do about it? And the answer is, it can strengthen its processes. Yeah, it can strengthen its democratic processes. And in Georgia, for example, we've just had a vote banning foreign NGOs because they can bring in democratic ideas. And so this is the kind of thing that Europe can be coherent about.
Roger, really good to speak to you. Thanks for that and explaining that situation as it unfolds across Europe. Roger Boyce, Times' diplomatic editor. And as and when there are any updates about the Slovakian Prime Minister, we'll also bring that to you on Times Radio as well.
It's time for On the Ground, where we speak to a report about what's happening on their patch. And of course, today we are in Slovakia with the journalist Thomas Corrie in the wake of the Prime Minister Robert Fico being shot, and also this extraordinary story that a civil war could erupt in Slovakia. Welcome to the show, Thomas.
Hey, I'm very happy to be here with you.
I gather there's an imminent announcement on the Prime Minister's health from the hospital. Do we know, have you picked up any rumours about what the latest is about his health?
Yeah, I think that the days to come will be critical. We have heard that the conditions of Prime Minister Fico are very serious, but it should be stabilized. So I think that we shall see in the coming days. But it's highly critical. We shall wait and we shall see.
Now, he is, from our perspective in the UK, he's described as a populist Prime Minister and quite a pro-Russian Prime Minister. What kind of things did he stand for? Does he stand for?
Yeah, I think it's a fair assumption. I do think that Prime Minister Fico is based on his rhetoric, an anti-Western Prime Minister, but I think that his words do not always match the deeds. I think he's been a very populist Prime Minister and has been very good at understanding the situation in Slovakia and the let's say average voters, as our pundits would say.
And why is there this extraordinary talk about civil war in Slovakia?
Well, I think we should acknowledge that the event which happened yesterday is a very shocking event in a deeply polarized country. I don't think that it happened, in isolation. And I also think that the responsibility of politicians is to de-escalate the situation, not to further escalate it. So I think that the words of a civil war are not representative of the whole government, nor the situation in Slovakia.
Because it was a government minister that said, it was the interior minister that said the country was on the brink of civil war. But what?
That's correct, and I look. It's not my task to be giving you my perspective on what the minister said, because I'm a news reporter. But to me, the words were shocking, frankly. And I don't think that Slovakia is on the brink of a civil war, though I do think that the situation is very tense, and I think that it might be even more tense in the coming days.
And is the polarization effectively between those who are pro-Russia and look east and those who are pro the EU and look west, as it were?
Yeah, I think it's a very simplified way to describe the situation in Slovakia, but it's fair to say that the country is divided more or less between three camps: those who would identify themselves as pro-Ukrainian and pro-Western, those who are kind of openly pro-Russian, and then a huge camp somewhere in between. But yeah, Slovakia is a deeply polarized country, as we have seen in the presidential elections and as we saw in the parliamentary elections last year as well.
I mean, obviously, we hope the Prime Minister recovers, but what do you think in the sort of immediate term is implications of this assassination attempt? Because I gather the man charged with the attempted murder was pro-Russian.
Yeah, I think it's very soon to be drawing conclusions. I don't think we can say with a high degree of certainty that he was pro-Russian, though it is fair that 8 years ago he had links with a group which is pro-Russian, but I don't think we can say he was pro-Russian. So we need to wait. I would be very cautious at this moment not to have analysis which would later prove to be incorrect. And I think that the situation is going to be very tense right now. So I'm very happy that the upcoming president and the current president have had a joint statement in which they call to de-escalate the situation.